Hello, I'm Bruce Whitfield. This is Peter Bruce, the editor of Business Day. If you don't read the thick end of the wedge every Monday morning, you really should, because, Peter, when we go into 2012, when we look at the massive complications that we have, the tapestry of politics and business and local and global macroeconomics, you've got material written already.
South Africa is a wonderful canvas to paint almost anything on. It's blank and complicated at the same time. We listened to Chris Hart in our Economic Outlook conference this morning, talking about some of the contradictions that arise in a country like South Africa, where clearly the ruling party, on the one hand, has this incredible stability. We know we know who the next government is going to be for quite a few years. There is relative economic stability in South Africa. We've been lucky through the recession. We haven't been, hurt as badly, nearly as badly as the European and industrialized economies. But policy on the way forward is coloured by all kinds of things. It's coloured by politics. It's coloured by our economic history and tradition. And there seem to be some things that no matter what you do to them never change. One of the things that never changes is the governments keep telling us to save money, and on the other hand keep punishing us for saving money.
And at the same time also encourage us to pay our taxes, and then we have the blow-ups in Limpopo, Gauteng Health, roads in Bloemfontein, for example. And those are the contradictions with which we as South Africans have to learn to deal with. And you express these frustrations regularly on a Monday morning or Sunday afternoon, published on Monday morning in your columns about the contradictions that we have to deal with.
Well, as taxpayers, we're supposed to be moral. So the taxpayer, the tax giver, is required to be moral in South Africa, but the tax taker, the state, does whatever it wants with the money, wastes an enormous amount of it. We've just seen the Auditor General come out with a report this month in January saying that some 22 billion rand has been wasted expenditure. So there's a real disjuncture there, and the kind of distrust that creates between taxpayers and tax takers becomes very dangerous. And you can see now taxpayers, because we're becoming more and more, or the middle class is growing in this country, you can see the tax givers beginning to push back on things like road tolls. Is a good point, and become more demanding of the government, which is impressive, because unless we do become more demanding of accountability in the way our money is spent, the natural inclination of policymakers, of governments with money in their pockets, is to spend it on staying in power.
You and I can talk about this all day, but until South Africans stand up for themselves and fight their own corner, there is absolutely no disincentive to government to change its spots.
Absolutely, and of course, in order to get to the point where you are standing up, particularly as a middle class, and saying no, this is enough and no more, it'll continue. But of course, the middle class is divided, and there's a racial history, there's a policy history, there's a political history behind that we're still struggling to overcome.
Do you get the sense, though, that the middle class is becoming more cohesive, that the middle class is beginning to stand up in a more unified way, going, hold on a second, I'm paying you 30 to 40% of my monthly income here. I understand where the spending pressures are, but whatever you do, don't waste it, don't pee it up against the wall.
There's no doubt that that's happening. I mean, the whole point about class analysis of politics is that eventually you have class interests rather than racial interests, and your class interests, the class interests of white South Africans, black South Africans, are more and more the same thing, and they'll end up, whether they know it or not, or whether they plan it or not, it'll happen. They'll end up saying the same thing, and they'll end up having, because they've got the same interests, and they'll end up behaving the same way too.
We talk about middle class interest, and of course everyone wants the preservation of middle class interest, but there is a growing pool of disaffected people in South Africa.
Of course there is.
And that is something which the tax base has got to be supporting and trying to bring into that middle class.
Well, what the middle class will end up saying to the state is, hang on a second, you're threatening our interests. Our interests are that massive poor people out there are properly looked after, that you deliver the taxes that we pay you, that you deliver the services that money buys to them properly. It has to happen that way.